Hello and welcome to yet another episode of our podcast, SW Property Matters. Today we're going to be discussing a little bit about how the way in which we view buildings is changing after the COVID pandemic. And as always, I'm going to let my guests make their own introductions. So Colin, Gillian, welcome. Over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be on this week. My name's Colin Harrop. I'm a building surveyor and I do my building surveying from the Sanderson Weatherall Leeds office.
Hello, I'm Gillian Smith. I'm an architect and I work in the Newcastle office within the architecture team.
Okay, thank you very much. Colin, I'm straight away dropping you in it. I saw you commented on LinkedIn after Joe Williams made a comment last week that building surveyors were a bit geeky and you weren't so sure. That said...
Well, yeah. I'm probably not sure, Dan, but whether I'm absolutely sure they're not is probably another question, actually. But Joe did say that building surveyors are geeky, and I kind of get where she's coming from. But rather than geeky, I prefer to say that building surveyors are very, very interested in fairly niche areas of the world, I guess. If you want to interpret that as geeky, I think it probably is. I mean, what I would say to people is that building surveyors, as a species, we tend to focus on detail. We tend to focus on the small things about buildings that make them work or not work or otherwise. And also, we quite often bring a bit of sort of, inquisitive curiosity to things, which maybe does sound a bit geeky. So I do know where Joey's coming from. I wouldn't gainsay her on this. But what I would say is that, there are bits of building surveying that can occasionally surprise you and can be a bit interesting.
Following on from that then, Colin, how did you actually, I know it's quite an interesting pathway, but how did you get into building surveying?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, but by interesting, you mean the worst way possible, I think is probably the answer. I basically, truth be told, I didn't really get on with school, and school and I didn't get on together. So when I left school, I got the opportunity, I joined the army as a combat engineer. And my job was basically to blow up buildings and bridges and anything like that. So I got into looking at structures through sort of combat engineering and demolition and trying to blow things up. And if you ever get the chance, it's unlikely, if you ever get the chance to blow up a bridge, I heartily recommend it. It's such good fun. So I had such a good time doing it. It gave me pretty bad tinnitus. But apart from that, it was generally all good. And I kind of got more and more interested in the way that things are put together, I suppose, and the way that structures stand. How they work, how they balance, and from there on, it kind of became obvious to me that actually I might start looking at how these things are put together and how they're looked after rather than trying to blow them up. So I kind of came at it from the opposite direction, I suppose. But it's not really a career route I would recommend for people, but it was an interesting start for me.
I'd say certainly very unique.
I think that's probably fair to say. I don't meet many people who have come at it from that direction, and there's probably a pretty good reason for that.
I think Gillian's obviously an architect. Again, it's probably one of the more technical disciplines that we offer here at SW. How did you get into architecture?
Well, I would say in comparison to Colin's experience, mine was perhaps more of a traditional route. From a young age, I always felt that I wanted to do something that was quite creative for a future job. I've always enjoyed being creative and creating physical things, so quite crafty in that respect. Yeah. I was interested in geography as well, so I like the environment and how people use the environment. So I was trying it between a few professions, but really something that made me focus on architecture was the fact that it would incorporate quite a lot of disciplines within its structure. So that was one of the things that really drew me towards it, because it would include such things like interior design, landscape design, and really focus on the environments that we live in. So from school, I went into architecture, studying architecture at uni, and completed my course for uni, which is a 7-year course altogether, including working in practice and completing professional exams. And that's really my journey. As I say, it's more traditional route rather than finding it later on. I went straight from school into university.
I mean, what I would say, Dan, is it's probably worth us just trying to explain a little bit, I guess, the difference between architects and building surveyors as well. And Gillian, I'm sure, will be able to explain it better than I would. But what I would say is that building surveyors kind of look at buildings and sometimes do changes to buildings, but we probably come from more of looking at the building from a sort of science point of view, I guess. Whereas architects sort of might do work with existing buildings, but quite often it's new buildings, and they come from more of an art point of view, I think. And I think that that's probably the main difference. Although there's obviously a lot of overlap between the two. But Gillian, I've probably done a really bad job of explaining what you do there.
Well, I was going to say there, Colin, I think architects work with all type of variety of buildings, whether that's refurbishment from existing buildings to new builds. And I think that's one of the things that I quite like about it, is that there's a lot of variety under that umbrella of the term architecture. No project is ever the same. Even if it may appear to be the same one existing building to the next, you'll always find something that needs a little bit of problem solving or creative thinking to tackle that design process. So it's all variety in that respect.
That's really interesting. I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because as teams you work quite closely together, but then, as you said, Colin, what you do is quite different, and you do come at it from very different angles. It's tricky to put that into words, I guess. Well,
that's absolutely right. I mean, what I usually tell clients, if I'm speaking to them, or people who aren't sort of used to our industry, is what we do at the end of the day is we just try and solve people's problems. That if a client sort of comes to us and says, right, I've got this building, it's not quite working for me, or I need another building, or I've got issues with the building that I want to solve, we sort of look at it more from their point of view and say, well, what issues have you got? Let's understand those first, and then we'll talk about what we can do to help. And at the bottom of it, all we really do is solve problems for people. I think if we're not doing that, we're probably not doing our job, I think.
Yeah, I would add to that, Colin. I think in terms of maybe the difference between architecture projects and a building surveying project is that maybe it's just the level of detail in the design that might change from one project to another. And the design process is quite an important early stage of an architecture project to ensure that your concept design meets all the client's requirements in the best way possible for the design.
Absolutely. I think that the other thing is that architects, without a shadow of a doubt, do much prettier designs than building surveyors ever would. If the world were designed by building surveyors, it would be a pretty grey place to live, I think it's fair to say.
Well, I won't comment on that. Again, just a question for both of you, I guess. You've come at it from very different points of view to end up working where you are now. Any tips for those looking to get into maybe a building surveying career, maybe an architecture career? Come to you first, Gillian. Have you got any thoughts on those considering university degree, or maybe sitting a university degree at the moment?
I definitely would say it's potentially a good thing to try and get some experience before maybe you go to uni, or obviously, and also during university. I think if you build up your experience, perhaps work experience at school, working in an architecture office or built environment office of any kind, you'll be exposed to the building environment and the possibilities that might come from that. I think in the built environment, architecture and building surveying, there's lots of different routes you could go down. So I think try and get as much experience as you can to find out which elements you like the best, and then you can make your decisions from that moving forward.
That's really good. And Colin, I know that you've had quite a lot of involvement with Leeds, the universities, and giving back. Do you want to just talk a bit about that and maybe some advice you'd give to younger surveyors?
Sure. I mean, I'm really lucky in that I've spoken to lots of different students at different levels who are considering careers in the built environment, and I say to all of them that I speak to, I say, look, this is probably quite sad of me, but if I had my chance again to sort of start again, I wouldn't change a single thing. I'd go into this industry. I think it offers some real challenges. It's difficult sometimes. It's hard to balance everything. But that kind of adds to it completely, and that's part of the joy of it. As Gillian said earlier, I don't think any 2 days are the same, no 2 projects are the same. It's always completely different, and I endorse what Gillian says. I think the thing to do is to throw yourself into it, and have a go at different areas. And it's so varied. You might end up sort of designing a skyscraper that's going to sort of sit in Dubai and do something like that, or you might end up looking at some beautiful historic building on a country estate somewhere and looking at craftsmanship that was done 400 years ago. It just can be that varied, and you might do those 2 things in the same week if you're lucky. I think getting experience in doing it. I think generally, if you kind of like to sort of study either around sciences and subjects like that, and like to put them into use and see things actually physically materialize in front of you, then it is a really good choice of career, and it's one that I'd recommend to anyone who's interested, really.
I definitely agree with that, Colin. I think that was one of the things that drew me to it. I like the idea of creating something in particular, and putting something into practice. I know that, as I mentioned before, the studying aspect of it seems quite long, but I think that also gives you the chance to really get enthusiastic about it and discover if architecture is your passion, and to go through like the university course after you finish your first 3 years. That initial degree gives you so many skills that you could transfer into other areas of the built environment, not just architecture. So it really does give you a foundation of qualifications that you can use for lots of different areas.
That's great, because I think possibly to a lot of people, signing up for a 7-year course might be quite daunting, at 18 when you finish school and you're not really sure what to do, to think, oh, I'll be 25 by the time I'm ready to properly go out and work is maybe quite a scary thought for many.
Definitely, and I think that's one of the reasons why within those years, the emphasis is made in working in practice. So you do your studying at university, then as part of your course you have to have your year out, where you actually gain that experience, practical experience working in an environment, so you can really get to grips with what the job and the profession involves.
That's great. I'm going to put you both on the spot a little bit. Gillian, I'll come to you first. You've both sort of mentioned a big draw to the profession being the variety of work. Perhaps without going into too much detail and maybe not naming, could you just talk about, I guess, a couple of jobs you've done in recent months or recent years that maybe show the sort of breadth and the width of what we get involved with at SW? Yes.
So recently we've been looking at a few refurbishment projects. As a team, we complete a few office projects. That's one of our focuses. One of the biggest projects that I've completed recently was a project just outside of Newcastle. Lifton House was an office refurbishment, which actually recently won an award, which we're quite proud of as a team. Won the North East Insiders Property Awards for the refit and refurbishment. And this project basically involved looking at an existing building, stripping out, doing in the interior and adding an extension to make it purpose fit for the client. This building hadn't been in use for a little while, so we really needed to focus on how this building was transformed into making it a purpose, an office suited for the new client that was moving in.
I'm glad you mentioned the award, because I was going to say I didn't know if you'd be too modest, but that was obviously brilliant to be for the client as well, that their office has won that, and it's obviously it shows the quality of the work that was put into it. So it's great. Thanks,
Anne. I thought that might have been a perfect opportunity to mention it. As I say, that the project itself had a lot of elements towards it. It's an historic building. It's well known within the area. It's been there for quite a while and has historic links. So I think that was one of the main factors that we wanted to try and maintain and strengthen the building itself, and not weaken its presence within its local environment. And as part of that, we really wanted to do it justice and refurbish it to the best of its ability.
Brilliant. And Colin, again, you've had a little bit of time to think. Just a couple of projects maybe that show the kind of stuff you're working on.
Sure. Well, I've got a bit of a team of surveyors that I work with, Dan. And I'm lucky to work with a really great team of people who do all sorts of different buildings. So we've been involved recently looking at some industrial buildings. We've been involved working on some caravan parks. There's been shops. There's been offices. And there's just about every other type of building I can possibly imagine. But there was one I was working on, which was, I remember just, there was actually only me in the room at the time, but I was working on this ancient old Georgian building, which was sort of put together, you know, a long time ago, and they had a problem of some water ingress into the roof of the building, which was affecting the structure and all the rest of it. So I had to go up and have a look at it. And whilst I was doing it, I was kind of feeling the edges of the plaster cornicing and the plaster work around the building. And just at one point, there was only me alone in this room. At one point, my hands just sort of grabbed hold of this piece of plasterwork, this ornate plasterwork, and I could feel the hand shape of the guy who actually did that plastering and shaped that plaster moulding sort of 1,000 years ago. And I could feel that he had a slightly bigger hand span than me. And it was just like sort of shaking hands with history back through the century. And I just had to sort of take a moment. And it was just, it was a bit incredible. And at its best, our job is a bit like that sometimes. And you get those fantastic kind of opportunities to get up and close and personal with the new and the old. And as I say, personally, it's a job I wouldn't swap for anything.
That's great. Certainly makes it interesting working, I guess, across all different types of property. And as you say, from new to old, the next day, I guess, it really will keep you on your toes, but also you get to work on some pretty incredible spaces.
Definitely,
yes. That's one of the best things about it.
Yeah. Right, we'll move on then. We've all, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess, spent a bit more time at home than maybe we've been used to previously. And I'm sure if you're like me, we've all tinkered a little bit with DIY because we've noticed odd things about our houses that we maybe hadn't before. How do you think the way that we are thinking about buildings has changed and is changing, I guess, largely due to the COVID pandemic and the fact that we have been at home a lot more?
Personally speaking, Dan, I think it's interesting. I think that there are basically not really many positive things at all to come out of the entire pandemic and the situation we've had over the last 12 months. But one thing I think has been a positive is I think people have actually stopped for a moment and noticed the spaces around them, whether that's their home, which we've all spent a lot more time in at home, I'm sure, but also people have thought a bit longer about where they work and offices, and actually, is that the best place to do the type of work that we're thinking about, or do we need to change slightly so that the spaces we have are more open to sort of collaboration and this sort of thing? So I think, as I say, I'm sort of looking for silver linings, and there aren't many, but one of them I think is people are a lot more aware of it. And I think that's a good thing, actually. I think that ultimately that will sort of better inform the buildings and the decisions that we're making about them, and that can only be good, I think, because buildings are a reflection of the people that use them, really, and that's all that they're there for in reality.
That's brilliant. So then, go on, Jillian. Did you want to add something?
Sorry, I was just going to say also, I think a lot of people have found that perhaps their living rooms or dining rooms have also they've had a requirement to have a bit of flexibility within these spaces over the last year, because you're working from home, like your dining room's also your office. I think there's an emphasis on the fact that where we live and where we spend most of our time, if that's a flexible space which you can use the best of your advantage, I think that's a bonus that will hopefully carry on into future design.
I think you're right. We spoke a little bit before we started recording, I guess, about heading back to the offices hopefully in the coming months. What sort of major changes do you expect to see? You mentioned flexible working spaces and I guess collaboration spaces. are there any other changes in design that you can see really going to be here to stay?
I would say, I think we all kind of have our own opinions on the positives and negatives of working from home, and also potentially working in the office as well. And I think what would be good to see is if we can bring all those positives and bring them forward, moving forward when we get back into the office. I think the office needs to provide a place of collaborative environment that you don't get from home, and I think that's what most people have missed whilst they haven't been going into the office, is that chance to have that sort of collaborative environment, talking to people, having the meeting spaces, bouncing ideas off each other. I think that's what the office needs to provide in that way.
I agree, Dan. I think it's all really going to be about collaboration in the future. I think there's sort of the very old-fashioned days of sort of sealing people in little boxes and expecting people to sit there and just tap away at a keyboard are really now dated and hopefully on the way out. I think that the more that humans work like computers and just sit there processing data, the more that they're likely to be see those jobs outsourced to a computer. And I think that humans are at the best when they act like humans, interact with each other, bounce ideas around, and come up with new solutions. So I think that the office has got to reflect that as a point of reason for existence, rather than a small box that people commute to sit and tap at a keyboard. Because I really think there's question marks now about whether that's a good use of people's time.
Yeah, I think we spoke a lot about different types of buildings during this, but something that you said, Colin, sort of, I guess, is quite a nice little soundbite, that essentially all that spaces and buildings are a reflection of the people that live in them, that work in them, that play in them. And that's, I think, what we at SW always try and get through to new surveyors that join, and just get across when talking to clients, that yes, we're dealing with a bricks and mortar building, but that is going to be used by hundreds of thousands of people, and that is essentially what it all comes down to, that there are people behind these spaces, and it's making sure they're right spaces for those people is ultimately what it boils down to.
I strongly agree, Dan. And Gillian and I, as an architect and a building surveyor, you can sort of be forgiven for thinking that our job is all about buildings, and it's actually not. Our job is all about people, and the buildings are important, but they're secondary. And how we come together as people to shape them, and then how those buildings shape the people that use them, is kind of at the heart of what we do, really, and that's kind of the important bit to me.
Definitely, I'd strongly agree with that as well. I think that's one of the starting points that we always have to look into at the beginning of a project. What do the people need? How is this project going to service the people that are using the building? And it's a great way to start the design process off.
That's great. Well, thank you both very much for that. We've got, unless you've got anything else to add, we've got some quick fire questions, as we always do, to get a little bit and put you a little bit on the spot right at the end. So unless you had anything to add on that, we'll jump into those.
Happy to jump into the quick fire questions for me then.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start off a nice easy one. Gillian, we'll come to you first. Are you a tea or a coffee drinker?
Ooh, can I say both?
Well, we have had a couple of people say both. A couple, I think, said they'll coffee in the morning and then maybe move over to tea. Seems to be a trend.
I'm the other way around. I love a morning cup of tea. I have to have a morning cup of tea, and then I like a sugary coffee in the afternoon.
Very good. And Colin?
Personally, I'm a bit one-sided on this one. I just go for tea all the time. I find if I drink coffee, it sends me absolutely loopy, and I just do stupid things really quickly. So I don't need any more of that in my life. So tea is the way forward for me, I'm afraid.
That's good. Obviously, like I say, spent a bit more time at home. What have you been filling your time with? Do you read? Do you watch Netflix? A mix?
Personally speaking, for me, it's books all the way. I'm afraid. Again, I'm not much of a TV fan. I think books are the best invention ever because it kind of can convey the ideas and thoughts of one person straight into the head of another person without kind of any interpretation or machinery in between. I think they're brilliant things. So it's reading all the time for me, I'm afraid.
Very good. And Gillian?
It's Netflix for me, but I'm fairly new to Netflix, so I'm enjoying it as a novelty.
That's good. That's good. And then shopping. Do you shop online? Do you shop? Well, you can't really shop at the high street at the moment, but in the next few months, what are you looking forward to? Getting out there or just back online?
I think I'm quite happy shopping online. I think if it was anything, if I would need to try on shoes, if I'm buying shoes, I like to try on shoes, but anything else, I'm happy online.
Yeah, with me, Dan, I don't really like shopping full stop, either online or in person or any other which way, to be quite honest. It's a means to an end for me. But to be honest, I do like if I do like kind of going into shops and seeing real people in shops and all the rest of it. And I kind of think that you lose something a bit when you go online shopping. So yeah, I hope our high streets continue to offer some reason to go there for a long time in the future.
I think that on the limited times I've been into the office or been into Leeds over the past few months, that's maybe when it's hit home quite how drastic things have changed. When Leeds city centre is very, very quiet, it is sad seeing all the shops closed and not the usual sort of number of people about.
I think so, and I think that you do get something by picking up something, and that you don't really get in a shop. One of my latest purchases online was I bought an axe because I needed to chop some wood for the fire at our house,
Right.
and I have bought, Dan, you would not believe, I bought like the biggest axe you've ever seen in your life. It looks like something a Viking would use to cut off someone's head with. And I thought to myself, if I'd seen that in a shop, I'd have gone, no, don't be silly. You really don't need that. You know. And, so there's a bit of a problem with scale, I find, which is perhaps not great.
Well, Colin, I'll come to you first for this one. Houses, I'm guessing by the fact that you've got an axe to cut wood for your fire, I know which way this is going to go, but are you in a new build or a sort of traditional property?
I can see why people like new houses. I can see why they say, you know, they sort of serve up a lot of solutions and all the rest of it. And we need to build new houses because there aren't enough for people in the country at the moment in general. But no, predictably, I'm traditional all the way. I'm afraid we're kind of wood fired in our house, and I like the oldie worldy kind of craftsmanship. I'm afraid so traditional for me.
Okay. And Gillian?
I'm going to have to agree with Colin on this one. I am a traditional as well.
That's good. So obviously spoke a lot around it. Moving forward, are you happy working from home? Are you itching to get back to the office, or is it a mix, like I think most people maybe? Go on, Colin, we'll go.
Well, I think for me, I think a mixture would probably work better. But I've got to say, I mentioned before, I've got a really good team of people around me. I do really miss being in person in the office and being able to kind of bounce ideas around and get out a sheet of paper and scribble some solutions together. And I know that there are lots of clever ways that you can do that online now, but to me, it always seems just a bit more of an effort. So I am looking forward to going back in the office and getting people around a table to discuss sort of real world problems and come up with some solutions. So yes, definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah. Gillian, do you agree?
I do. Well, I think I like a mix. I think currently one of the highlights of my week is when we have our team meetings on and see each other face to face and have a good chat about the project and also what's just going on. And I do miss that. So I think I'd like a mix, but eventually I'll be happy to go back to the office. I think it's a positive change to go back to the office and see everyone and enjoy the benefits that it brings with it.
Yeah, that's great. And then finally, the one that often stumps people, your dream dinner guest. Colin, I think I've asked you this before when we've done an article, so hopefully you had an answer ready.
Well, you have, Dan, but one of my problems is, one of my problems in life is that I go through life kind of collecting heroes and people that I think would be great to be at a dinner party. So when you say the problem I've got with this question is just the one, so I sort of sat down and thought, well, who would I like to invite to a dinner party? And there's such a long list. There's kind of favourite authors and writers like kind of P.G. Wodehouse and Agatha Christie and Patrick Leigh Fermor and people like that. And there's Max Woosnam, who'll be absolutely mean nothing to most people, but I've bored you at length about him, Dan. I know. He's my favourite ever sportsman. He did everything basically. He won gold and silver medals at the Olympics, and he played for Chelsea and Man City, and he played for England at cricket, and just did just about everything you can imagine. And my favourite all time was, apparently he once beat Charlie Chaplin at table tennis, and he played with a butter knife left-handed. I know I've bored you about him before, but I just think what a hero. But even then, when you asked me to pick one, I think I would have to settle on Ernest Shackleton, the polar explorer. I think, because some of the stories that he could tell would just be legendary, and I think he would be my number one choice.
Good. I look forward, if you can have 10 guests, I imagine you'd have quite an eclectic mix around the table.
Very probably. But yeah, one is pretty difficult to do.
Yeah. All right, Gillian, that's a tough act to follow. Who would you have?
What a great answer, Colin. I think, I was thinking maybe I'm going down the celebrity route here, so maybe a comedian or like a celebrity chef or like an A-lister, so they would bring some good stories to the table. Yeah. I did think Jamie Oliver, because he could help me with the starters and the main course and food.
That's good. I've not had anyone take it that way. They're actually picking someone that can cater for them. I like that.
I would say my cooking's definitely got better over lockdown, but I would never say no from a little help from Jamie Oliver.
Great answers. Very good. Well, thank you both very much for joining us, and I hope anyone listening found that as interesting as I did. We'll look forward to the next episode, and thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's been great. Thanks, Dan.